want a garden so I can grow, and you can only go so far on your own.
So hi, I'm Lucy
I'm Gavin.
and we live in Permaculture Island on the Isle of Wight in Knighton. We have an off-grid setup here, growing our own food, which includes having animals.
Our own electricity supply, as in we predominantly use solar energy. We're not grid tied in any way, so we had to get kind of clever with where we have excess electricity, which obviously led to the pantry. We dug our own well, as we have our own water supply.
We've been here about 21 years now.
Yeah, 21 years. We started growing food a long time ago, and we did that in the traditional way for a couple of years, like, you know, typical kind of soil management, should we say, compost piles and growing all the annual crops that everyone knows. And we found that that was a lot of work to obviously, you know, grow, do all the successional plantings and the soil management. And slowly over the years we developed and moved towards a permaculture way using forest gardening, because essentially the perennial systems by far less work, and the management of the soils of using mulches are less work as well, you know, instead of sort of doing lots of composting, should we say. I'm not opposed to hard work, but I'm not a fan of unnecessary work. And so what I like to try and do with the site is actually design things in a very sustainable way, meaning that I want whatever I'm designing to self-regulate as much as possible. And so that would go for food supply, that would go for whether I was trying to arrange the animals, like for example the chicken cone. The pantry itself, I'm going to build thermal mass and want that to kind of coast on itself for as long as possible. The greenhouse obviously does that. Our house does that. We build in thermal mass into the, solar passive heating for our home. It just makes a lot more sense to design things properly, in the first place, and they'll serve us in the long run.
Designing out the hard work.
Yeah.
My name's Jan. I've been coming here to Permaculture Island for about 10 years, something like that now. And it has changed quite a lot over time. And I think that's their secret weapon in a way, because part of the permaculture process is observing and being within nature and watching how things change and how things need to change to be responsive to whatever's going on. When I first came, they only had chickens. They didn't have other livestock at all. The garden, the bones of the garden was very much the same as it is at the moment, but the contents of the garden has changed and some structures around them have changed. For instance, they didn't have a greenhouse, the pod looked much different, the animal buildings looked much different. So it's kind of been smartened up over time as well. And part of that process has been the willingness and desire to share these sort of permaculture processes, and how important both Gavin and Lucy think it is to be sustainable into the future with our food, our animal husbandry, and our pressure on ourselves and our pleasurable living as well. So over time, the puzzle to begin with was, how do we take this out to people? How do we get people interested? Because it does seem very niche to a lot of people, very alien, given how we're taught to garden, dig down 2 spits and fill it in with stuff and then plant and then dig it all up again. It's a very different process. So Joe blogs down the road, how do you get them interested? So it's been interesting for me to watch how they've developed their educational program, as well as maintaining this as their home and their lifestyle. So there's no artifice here, it's as they are. What you see is what you get. And if something happens that doesn't work, they respond to it by saying, how could we do that better? And I think that's a magnificent example to share with the community. Also, of course, I mean, they rely on their mulching program to be able to keep this much land and growth going in a sustainable permaculture way. So the mulch bins down the bottom that invite the community to come in and put their garden chippings in the various bags keeps them going. That's great for the community, and it's great for Gavin and Lucy for their land. So it's a good cooperative arrangement, which Gavin has adopted a golf buggy to be able to load it up and chug it down to the bottom of the cliff down there, or where it needs to go. Another example of being adaptive. And certainly the tours and the open days are good for general public to come in and start to ask questions. The more intensive tours are good for deeper answering of questions. How do you look after the chickens? How do you manage the goats? How do you manage when they have young? How do you get that to grow? How do you keep your garden watered? How do you do this and that? How do you get your electricity? How do you store your food? To more specific ones about how they bottle or process their produce so that they can feed themselves through the year, and how they make soap, how they look after themselves. So you've got several different educational programs that again have been responsive to what people have said they wanted. But certainly over the last 10 years or so, it's changed a lot, an awful lot. Where the animals are now, that was just beans. And for me, as a member of the public, if you like, even though I come here a lot as volunteer, I've been able to take that knowledge back to my garden and change my garden, and that has had a knock-on effect on my next door neighbours. So it begins to spread out and begins to grow. And I think really that's part of Gavin and Lucy's vision, that they want to share out what they've managed to achieve with very hard work, because they really believe in it. They believe permaculture as a way of life, not just as a growing stuff, has a lot of value, particularly in our changing times with our very interesting economy.
So we noticed after finishing building the house that we started to design the garden, and we noticed that we needed a higher fertility soil, and we decided to tap into our local community. They were taking their green mulch, so leaves, grass cuttings, hedge cuttings to the local dump, and we were like, we could use that ourselves. And so we provided these bags for neighbours to come down and basically tip their green mulch into our ton bags. And we then just basically take this and use it as a mulch layer around our fruit trees, nut trees, fruit bushes. More fragile crops will tend to use the grass cuttings, as long as it's not too seedy. You do have to be careful, but this acts as a wonderful blanket to look after your soil. It acts as a weed suppressant, less watering, because obviously less water evaporation, and it's constantly breaking down, feeding your soils, so it has multi-use.
There's also there's foods in here for the animals. So when we come to empty a ton bag, we'd first of all take it to the animals and feed them all the things that we know that they would like. And then we realised actually people actually like the animals, that the community wanted to engage with us. And that was really novel, to be honest, because we actually started this site kind of privately, busy focusing on what we're trying to do. And this mulch service really transformed, it opened up a way that the community can kind of come in here and actually sort of see what we're up to. And they then wanted to feed the animals directly with their hedge cuttings and things like that. And there's a whole load of people that love to come and feed the animals. you know, and obviously that's things that we would normally have to do, and here we are, you know, the community getting pleasure from it, and yet we're getting our animals fed. So it was a win-win situation.
So I've actually put a list of all the hedge cuttings and the weeds that our animals, our goats, pigs and chickens will eat, and we have a separate area for people to either leave that for us to feed the animals, or we encourage some of our neighbours to come in and directly feed the goats, which I think has incredible well-being factors, just being around animals and knowing that, you know, the ivy that you've just dropped off here is going to really good use. And so yeah, that has a really good feel-good factor to it.
It was a game changer when we became useful to people. Prior to that, people can kind of view how we live and what we're trying to do as kind of, you know, it's an unknown and suspicious, you know, of that in a way. And so this really closed that gap. People could see us, what we were up to, who we were, and they wanted to support us. They were like, what do you need? You know, and so it led to kind of dropping off things like wood or tools, you know, or even people coming in and offering help. I mean, and we'd never had that, had we?
No,
As in,
no.
it took this mulch service to really integrate with the community, to be honest. That was a game changer in so many ways.
Yeah, it was a material, a product that they didn't want, and we needed it. So it was a win-win situation.
Yeah, and people don't have to travel to the centre of the Isle of Wight, and they've got to make appointments, and there's lots of people that don't want to use the technology to have to book appointments, and so people can come here without an appointment, and you know, it's a low wall to drop over, meaning that you can park really near. It's not noisy, because these central tips can be incredibly noisy, and it just seemed to click and work, which was great.
It's a free service. We don't charge it is just for our local community, because we're small here. So it's just probably about 100 odd people use it. And you know, there are certain requirements that we ask of them, and our opening times, well, the days we open, the opening times, what they can and can't bring down, and we have got to know our community, because we can stand here and chat to them, and you know, Knighton has a fair amount of retired people, and so yeah, it's good to meet them and give them a bit of our time as well.
Yeah. When we moved here, the land had been degraded by excessive lawns, and so we needed a way of raising fertility quite quickly, and so we had this idea that we could access the community, and that if we provide bags that they can come and drop off mulch, that we could rapidly lay that on the land and compost in place and raise the fertility, but also to stabilize the land, because as the mulch breaks down and turns into compost, the compost can hold 8 times its own weight in water, and where we're in an instability area, that we could equally grow food but also have less water going into the land itself.
So one of the things when we bought the land was it came with landslip, and the land has moved here in the past, and one of the things that we do to mitigate water here is use heavy mulches. So after quite an extensive research, the winter rains was something that we had to be very aware of to add to land water here, and so interception of rain was very important to us.
Well, we looked towards forests. I had to study and find out, you know, what's the difference between a field, shall we say, as opposed to a woodland, and it turns out that a woodland will actually absorb 25% of the year's rain. And if you actually put that into sort of the amount of water that is, that's actually 1,000 tons per acre. And so I realised that basically we've got to create a food crop that's based on forest systems. That's why we picked forest gardening, and we're going to need to cover our soils in very woody material, because 2 centimetres of wood will absorb 1 centimetre of water, and so that's kind of on par with, like, a cubic metre of wood is about 500 litres. And not only that is its water holding capacity, but it actually evaporates it after the storms pass, and this has all become sodden and wet, it actually will gas it back off to the atmosphere, or the trees behind us will begin to pull all the moisture out of the compost that obviously forms underneath this layer, putting that back into the atmosphere as well. It's like drying clothes on a windy day. And that combined effect of a forest system eventually could be the difference between the land staying or moving. They're fragile systems, and this is not local just to this site, but the Isle of Wight suffers and could benefit from understanding this science, but equally the rest of Britain that suffers with flooding. It's the same deal, as in that you want to find a way to stop runoff. And if you instead of having just fields around you, but we actually had some woodland up there, or even tree crops, then that's going to lessen the amount of water flushing into those rivers and not bursting their banks so often.
So I think we've planted hundreds of trees here, whether that be fruit trees or nut trees, fruit bushes, ground cover crops. It all aids in stopping the rainfall from really penetrating the land here and causing problems. And
it speeds the growth up of everything. I mean, the trees around here are like turbo, because we're putting down fertility. And so, all of those roots, all that matrix is going to hold all the earth together, stop it from moving as well.
So we got chickens probably about 15 or more years ago, and we did the whole typical, put them in a house, and we lost chickens like everybody else, and it can be a bit soul destroying when you've put all this time and effort in, and without vindicating Mr. Fox, he's just doing his thing naturally. Gav sat and thought, and with permaculture, observe and interact is one of the biggest principles we probably use here. And he sat and he watched and he looked at the chicken and observing what a chicken actually needs. And so chickens, are jungle fowl, and all they actually require is a forest floor and a tree. And so this is where the tree cone got created from, because we had a chicken that quite a few times, didn't she, come the end of the day, would find the nearest tree and just go sleep in it for the night. So
yeah, that was the one that actually survived the fox. And occasionally there was chickens that would actually roost on the chicken shed roof, on the ridge, and it was just shouting to me, an elevated roost is something that not just that they want, but they actually feel safer up high. And so it just came down to a way that they can actually access a raised roost. So obviously the chicken cone is more or less an umbrella of sorts. It's to shelter them from the wind and the rain, but it's how does the chicken actually get up there? Well, although the chickens have come from jungle fowl, and they're part of the pheasant family, these chickens have been selectively bred, and they're a lot heavier than their counterparts, and so expecting them to fly up into a raised roost was just not going to happen. And so a type of ladder had to be created, something that these big chickens, they have actually got very powerful legs, and so they can actually jump from rung to rung. And so I did some testing to see what a chicken's ability was, and basically we constructed the cone and then started to trial different ladder systems, and this is the one that they preferred. And so if we were here at dusk, you would see, a bit like Heathrow, suddenly the chickens would all line up and it would get very busy accessing that ladder, and they'd all make their way up, clucking as they go. They get up into the cone, working out who's in charge, who gets the best perches and things like that. And by dawn, they kind of glide down, if I can call it gliding. It's more or less falling with style, because they're pretty big, but they do manage to fly down. The ones that there is a few that decide to come back down the ladder, but most of them just go for the descent, as it were.
Chickens use the light quite a lot, so they'll get up when the sun rises and they'll go to bed when the sun sets. So 5 o'clock this evening, maybe 6 o'clock, our chickens can be quite lazy. They will start to jump from rung to rung, which effectively are the branches of a tree, and they'll get to the top and they'll turn around and they will jump up into the cone, and there are roosting bars up there that they will just sit all through the night and sleep. There is no floor to the chicken cone, so through the night they will poo, and all of their poo falls to the floor, which takes another job away for cleaning out. I never have to clean out a chicken house, so I don't have to put my chickens to bed, I don't have to get my chickens up, and I don't have to clean them out.
But the chicken poo used to rot the floor as well in the old house, and because we had quite a lot of chickens, it was actually a shed that you actually had to get in and clean the floor. And it was awful, to be honest, even after a few days, the smell. And so, you know, we know the chickens don't like that smell either, you know, the ammonia coming off. And so this design not only is that it doesn't need cleaning out, but it actually preserves the structure. To date, we haven't lost any chickens to any of the predators.
We've never lost a chicken since using our cones, so
Yeah.
We've had the cone for probably about 10 years now.
Another positive is that we've not wasted any of the floor space, because typically a shed on the floor kind of encourages rodents and things under there, and it actually wastes the space. Having it elevated, they can still forage on the ground, but equally there's a shadow, and if it rained right now, I know where they'll all go. They'll all go underneath that big cone and use it as an umbrella.
Also, when it rains, a chicken can, so these chickens are golden buff Orpingtons.
They're big birds.
And so they're dual purpose, and they lay a good amount of eggs through their lifetime, but chickens can go down to about -15, which is quite a feat really. And so they can handle the cold, and they can handle getting wet. Their feathers are you know, incredible for that. But what chickens can't handle is getting cold and wet at the same time. And what we tend to do is then, you know, put them away at night in these houses, and we create a domino effect then of problems with pests and illnesses. And so with the cone, it's got no floor, it's just got its like tree canopy. The chicken can dry out after a damp, miserable, wet day. So we don't get blooms of pest problems with the cone, which is, you know, a great benefit. And they maintain themselves. They're beautifully well-conditioned birds. Our animal husbandry here has inclusion, so we try not to separate our animals. Obviously, our beautiful Morgana pig here has just given birth, so we give her her time and space with her piglets, but eventually they will go back into the main run. And these two beautiful girls here, my golden Guernseys, are milking at the moment, and my milking stand is behind us, so they tend to stay in this pen. But on the whole, our animals all live together, pigs, chickens and goats, as you'll see in the main run. And what comes with that is the chickens keep the goats and the pigs incredibly clean by sitting on them and picking off any pests. The chickens will eat the pig poo, which means less manure on the floor building up and becoming problems in winter, wet winters.
The reason that the European robin follows the gardener around is actually because of the wild boar. And it was basically the disturbance of the wild boar in the European forest which led the robin to begin to follow eventually us around. So in a way, the gardener has replaced the wild boar. That gave me an idea that the pigs and chickens would probably do well together, meaning that pigs are going to disturb exactly as the robin likes to try and exploit. And instead of obviously the robin still accesses and uses our pigs in the same manner, but the chickens can actually be fed by that as well. Basically, a pig wants to root around. We've created a compost pile that they're walking on, and not only does that obviously provide us eventually some of the finest compost that can be made, because it's a very well balanced mix, we say, but it's full of compost worms, it's full of loads of insects, it's full of loads of invertebrates. There's all sorts of organisms in there that basically the chickens want to get at, but the pig provides them that way. So the pig eventually, when it gets hungry enough, it will start rooting around in all this compost, and the chicken's basically just moving in, picking up all the bits that the pig can't see. And so it's that type of symbiotic relationship where they're better together than alone. Also, I haven't got to have all these separate pens and have all these separate water systems that I've got to use. They've got single water systems, and all their food is mostly natural based, as in it's either coming from cuttings in the garden fruits and vegetables. What comes in the mulch from the community equally contributes to them. And it's that they end up eating all of the greenery, all the leaf stuff, and what is left behind is the woody materials. And it's that keeps their feet dry. So during the winter period, that this is actually not a clay quagmire of kind of pig poo and wee, but it actually is a dry floor, because pigs don't want to be in all of that during the winter period. They want the kind of access to wet compost, wet soils in the summer period, but in the winter time they actually want it dry. And you don't want all of that bacteria, you know, like trench foot. It ends up leading to all sorts of animal problems if the animals are walking around in their own wee and poo, essentially. And so by feeding them natural foods as we are, this mulch is like the same as a forest floor, is actually looking after the animal, but equally it's feeding them as well.
To complement the chicken cone, obviously our chickens are quite safe at night, but through the day the pigs act as a type of security guard for the chickens, so no fox is going to be coming anywhere near to cause any kind of threat. So it's a really good friendship. All of them work very well together. They eat very similar types of food as well. We try and feed them all as naturally as possible. We're not void of buying in some bagged food as supplement, but we try and grow as much as we can to feed the animals along with our mulch service. But yeah.
Well, it's actually potatoes, because we were looking for a way to feed these animals on site or locally. A lot of the bag the bag food that you can buy is obviously from, grown probably not in a great way, and it's imported from very long distances. And so just as we're trying to feed ourselves, we're actually trying to do the same for the animals. And so although we've got plentiful potatoes on the site and we've got a good way of growing them in a simple way, we really needed something to balance it out for the omnivores, the chickens and the pigs. And so I was looking at all the nutritional values of various plants in the garden, and I came across the stinger nettle eventually, and I looked at the nutrition values of the stinger nettle. I was absolutely astounded of its protein levels. It's also really high in calcium, it's also high in iron and various other nutrients and minerals, and it's what we decided to mix with the potatoes as a balanced meal for chickens and pigs. So basically we cook up potatoes, we mash them up, and then the stinger nettles from the previous year, which we've dried and stored just like hay, we will add that to the mash, mix it in, and the chickens and pigs will absolutely waffle that down. But if you try and separate those foods, they simply won't eat it. The chickens and pigs will refuse to eat the stinger nettles. So like children, where you're trying to get them to eat the salads and have a balanced diet, you've got to find a way of
disguise it.
What there needs to be, what's the word? A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, and it turns out that medicine is actually the potato. And so it's great that we've got, stinger nettles are not even a crop that I actually have to grow. They're just on the periphery, and so we can cut them as hay and store them for the winter period.
We have all the animals here, and every animal is designed into our lifestyle here. And whether that gives us eggs or meat or milk or manure, to be able to have those products, I need to be able to offer the best life possible for that animal. And so I need to be able to know what these animals have eaten. I need to know the life that they've had. And that's the most important thing for us, is to know that these animals have had the best life that we can possibly offer them.
But also in reverse as well, actually, that we're better off having them here. There's a reason why the animals are so close to the house, is actually we actually wanted to be near them. We actually find it incredibly satisfying to come out here and interact with them, to feed them and care for them. In the winter time, we spend our evenings out here drinking kombucha, and and we sit with the pigs, and the goats. I mean, the chickens have gone to bed at that time, obviously, but the pigs and the goats are, incredibly friendly, and I guess there's a kind of a social dependency occurred, like you can see here, that they've actually got used to the care, and it's just incredibly satisfying to
She's quite demanding.
She's putting her head up my shirt.
Yeah. But you can see why the mulchers, the local community want to be able to come down here and interact with the animals and feed them and know that their gardens have produced potentially food for our girls and boys.
The mulchers equally want to see us interacting with the site because it's incredibly novel. You'd normally have to get on a plane and go and find this somewhere out of the UK, and then everyone would be speaking probably a different language. And you know, we're down here on the Isle of Wight, and it's just so novel, I guess, to live this way in this day and age. And it's not something that we necessarily cooked up, as it were. It just found us. You know, we basically just kept doing more of what we thought was lovely. You know, what we felt was right. And that's the magic. That's the thing that's so wonderful to sort of be led that way. You know, it's dynamic intervention, perhaps.
So we used to have a lot of tomatoes out the front of our house here in pots, and it was noticed that we were forever watering them, spending a lot of time and investment in doing that. When we thought about the water that is exiting the house, grey water, could we utilise that and reuse it? So what we did was we created a trench along the front of the house here, an impermeable one, so it held water, and we filled it with compost, probably up to about 50 centimetres.
Yeah, pretty deep compost.
And so our bathroom and our kitchen grey water runs into this trench, and now the plants that we plant along here basically wick up the grey water, which a huge thing on that is we've saved so much time keeping our plants alive. We're not watering from above, which can have the risk of contamination. So you've always got to remember when using grey water that you water the soil, not your plants as such. But yeah, it works incredibly well. As you can see, the tomatoes behind us are loving it.
Yeah, compost holds 8 times its own weight in water. And so once you start getting, you know, water underneath and watering from there, I mean, I think most of us have tried to water a dry pot in a conservatory and realise that you've got to have a container underneath it. And, 10 minutes later, you'd come back and the water that pooled in that container has vanished. And basically the soil actually wicks it up like a sponge. And it's that we're using. And but it's not even, we're not even just after water. It's actually better that it's grey water because it's coming out of the house with nutrients in it. You know, all of the we might call them contaminants, is actually the soil organisms absolutely love it. It's food. And so, I mean, I think every gardener knows that as the summer unfolds, that the watering regime becomes harder and harder, and then finally there's a hosepipe ban. We just started to begin to think out of the box. You know, here we are in this drought, with a hosepipe ban, and we've got water pouring out of the house, which we can, lawfully do because it's grey water. Why aren't we putting it to use? And so it just made perfect sense to use that somehow. And by doing it safely, moving it underneath the soil, it not only is it safe for us to use the crops, but it's actually cleansing that water. It actually comes out clear at the end.
So once the water level reaches a certain height within the grow bed, there is an overflow pipe that allows overflow water. I mean, it would have been filtered by the time it gets to that stage, that runs under the drive and goes into a second grow bed, which again is picking up water.
That's absolutely critical, obviously, that we have that overflow pipe, because that controls the height of the water. It can never go higher than that pipe. And so it's an essential part, of
Otherwise you're
this
going to get anaerobic problems, aren't you?
Yeah, but the good thing about a house is it's always spilling out water. It's like having a stream, or it needs that supply of constant water to keep pushing the other water forwards, and that way it never goes anaerobic. And so it's always good for plants. One of the problems of greenhouses is that they get awfully hot during the day and then quite cold at night. And so I needed to find a way to regulate the temperature between those two realms. One of the ways that can be done is to basically submerge the greenhouse, meaning dig away the earth to expose the concrete foundation. And also I've added a raised bed, basically to run as a thermal exchange between the air itself and the sun, to heat up the mass of the compost area, which of course is full of water, Also, all of the concrete, the steps and all the foundation absorbs the heat of the day and then radiates it back at night, keeping it warm. During the day, of course, that is actually going to act as a cooling medium. It's actually going to stop the greenhouse from kind of a runaway temperature where the leaves start closing up, transpiration is compromised, it gets stifling hot in there. No one likes it particularly, including us, because we have to go in there and obviously harvest the fruits as well. And so it made real sense to actually go underground a bit to allow that heat exchange to occur. The raised bed, of course, warms up quicker in the springtime and in the autumn, allowing the soil and all of the water that's in there to warm up and then radiate it back out. So the raised bed is actually a wicking bed. It's no water going to stay. We've actually got a pond liner underneath it, and so any water that we put in there, it has to wick back up. That's a really game changer in the sense that we can actually store enormous amounts of water in the compost. We have to water less. We've got a lot more water that can absorb the temperature and regulate itself in there. All of the winter rain off the roof collects in the tanks at the back, and we're using a gravity system. We can do a free watering system all summer to keep those plants topped up with water, and it lasts probably, it's a week, at least a week between watering.
So this is our pantry behind us, and the pantry is made from a lorry freezer body. It's incredibly insulative, and we learned quite soon after designing and growing our food here on the land that we needed to store food for winter months. So we're eating lots of fresh through the summer, and the winter would come along, and we wanted our food that we'd grown.
We had lots of perishing food, and,
yeah.
and the animals would help themselves to it, and so the first pantry we actually tried was underground, and the temperature remained fairly steady at about sort of 10 or 12 Celsius. And although that might seem cooler, obviously in the summer months, it wasn't that cool in a way. And also we got quite a high water table here, so going underground is actually quite problematic. So, like for instance, potatoes continuously sprout at that temperature, and so we're forever taking all the roots off, and all they would do would dry out and go sort of flexible and not last. And so we also had lots of excess solar energy from our off-grid system. When we've stopped charging everything, and there's basically just solar going to waste because we're not connected to the grid, meaning that we can't sell it back. And so it seemed to me that we're missing out on a trick, that we could actually run a compressor and actually create a walk-in fridge essentially. And so yeah, the lorry freezer body was a eBay find, which we're able to bring it back and build it ourselves. We increased its insulation, and to add to the thermal mass, we obviously had to add lots of water inside, which of course can be the goods, the drinks, and all the crops that we've stored in there. And essentially, as soon as there's excess solar energy, the compressor would come on and supply cooling and chill down all that liquid mass. And then at the end of the day, the pantry would switch off and have to coast through the night, maybe for a few days, depending on how much solar electricity that we have. And it's that stored the energy, the cooling, as in it's all locked in, all of that mass, all that water that's in there. And so it was a real game changer, to be honest, to have the pantry on site and its proximity to the house. It's like having an on-site shop, as it were. And so we could keep the rodents out, keep the badgers out, and all our food was lasted like, a year's supply of potatoes, would last, 12 months. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. Through the winter period, we were finding that we were running out of solar, and so we decided to cool the pantry down at obviously the coldest time of the day, which is the night time. And so I added roof vents. They basically, using an automatic window opener, these insulated vents open up at dusk and close at dawn, and that then preserves the cold that we've managed to pass through the structure. And it's to allow to pull the air through without using fans. We actually looked into the Benelli effect, where just as how you'd open in your house perhaps a door and a window on opposite sides and hear something slam, it's that through draft that I wanted to harness and sort of use as part of the cooling. And so by having one of the vents pointing into the prevailing wind and the other one behind the structure, and as the wind passes over the roof and the sides, it actually creates a negative pressure behind, and it's that actually pulls the air through. and so we could have good cooling without using fans and using just the night air wind.
We also have the solar tubes put on the side, but you'll also notice on the side, so we're very south facing here, and so Gav's also put a sunshade on the south facing wall.
The pantry basically needs to be really near your house. And so they had to combine as a social area, you know, and obviously we're trying to get the sun off the structure, which is part of that whole roof lifting up angle, is to actually take the sun off so that air can, you know, it can be cooled down. And the front here, if we're trying to shade the front, then we may as well create other energy for ourselves, which is what the water tubes are. That's actually creating shade onto the structure, but equally creating free solar hot water for us. And obviously the shade is, although it looks attractive, it's all about trying to get the sun off the structure so it doesn't heat up as much.
So we've lived off grid for 21 years now, and we're not grid tied. It's just solar here, and it's been challenging at times, especially perhaps through the winter when you haven't got abundance of sun like today on this lovely sunny day, where you're just charging up everything. The washing machine's on, the pantry's running, you're charging the car, everything's plugged in, and then winter time comes along and I hear on my shoulder Gavin saying, turn this off, turn that off. We don't have enough energy to run certain systems here, and you really do become aware of how energy works and what items pull a lot of energy. So yeah, it's been a big transition for me, a big learning curve on energy. But we've managed to build things here to run and have a lifestyle with quite an abundance of electrical items.
Yeah, well, we've expanded the solar system as time's gone on. You know, it's been an accumulative thing. Like in the beginning, we actually were facing an expensive grid connection. I think 20 years ago it was £2,500, and so we decided instead of doing that, let's just invest in off-grid. And you know, our first system was pretty low, as in it could even run a washing machine, and then, you know, we slowly decided that this was something we could do. Technology's got considerably better and more affordable, I guess, to live this way. Now we got TIG welding machine, you know, we run our road car, you know, electrically. We can charge the golf buggy, which we use for the garden. We cook electrically for 8 months of the year.
Pantry runs from
the
it.
pantry runs from it, the accommodation runs from it. You know, it's not necessarily do we go without, it's just we have to be mindful of what are we trying to use and when. Like there needs to be sufficient solar energy to be able to kind of like weld, you know, so I'm not going to weld in the darkness. I'm going to, you know, do that job when it's sunny. And in that there's value, it seems, when you don't have a constant, that you actually, you know, that you can kind of go without occasionally. There seems to be a value. And so the winter really teaches us the value of electricity, and so through the summertime there's massive appreciation, and just having that ebb and flow of almost any kind of resource seems to have that effect. And I like that way of living. I think it steers us in a good direction. You know, there's appreciation in that, there's gratitude in that, and I can't seem to do it in another way apart from by having sort of the ebb and flow of things.
It certainly taught me, coming from quite perhaps a convenience kind of lifestyle, to be very, very mindful of resources, and energy is a big one here. So yeah, being careful certain times of the year is very important.
Obviously the lithium technology, the battery technology that we have is not only very high resource dependent, but they're actually really expensive, and so we need to get really smart with designing electricity here. You know, instead of just putting in enormous battery banks, you know, we actually have to be really thoughtful. Like the Pantry, utilizing the excess solar energy, is about actually creating sort of practical, you know, design. You're looking at physics, you know, looking at the science. How can we actually make this building as efficient as it possibly can? Clever design, it seems, you know, is going to be the way forward. I'm not saying that technology won't change and perhaps improve, but ultimately, really, we can match that with permaculture design. And for me, when I discovered permaculture, it was like uncovering the holy grail. You know, it was finally that there's something that actually makes sense. You know, that something I can work with, something that actually sort of challenged the crazy world that we're in. And so everything changed from then on. You know, it was just it is just a fantastic way of shaping your life in a better direction, and it's I just hope it continues to spread.